Some of you may have seen this picture on the rendering forums, where I use a multi-layer EXR with a custom user interface. We're going to be using Maya, which costs $3,600. We're also going to be using the aftermarket rendering engine vray, which costs $1,000. And finally, we're going to be compositing in Nuke Studio, which costs $9,200. Some people might think that this sounds excessive, but when you compare it with Autodesk's Entertainment Creation Suite, which has 3ds Max, Maya, Mudbox, Motion Builder, and Softimage for $8,500, it's about the same. You wouldn't think twice about spending $20,000 on your hardware, like this workstation from Servers Direct. As I stated, we're going to be using a multi-layered EXR image, which has several layers combined into one file, thus saving hard drive space. The model we're using is this truck, which comes from CG's Finest Cars, which can be found on Creative Squid. When you first take the model out, you'll notice that the cab has errors. There are several holes in the poly mesh, as well as some of the faces, which I'm not even sure how to describe how they got that messed up. But this is what the model looks like when it first comes out of the CG's Finest Cars Volume 1. And that's about what it looks like when you render it. I've already put some work into this model, filling in all the holes and fixing the UVs so that the colors still match up. Then changing all of the materials to V-rays, like this V-ray car paint material. Originally, the model came with a bunch of Phong-based materials for mental ray. And this is what it looks like after you render it in V-ray. With the multi-layered EXR, you have several compositing layers, including the matte layer, the material layer, and the ambient occlusion layer. If we go into the render settings, under the render elements, you can see that we can easily pick out the different layers. Once we pick out the different layers in the render settings, and we choose the EXR multi-layer as opposed to the regular EXR, then we can start rendering multi-layered single images. If we notice here in the file, we have one EXR image with 12 layers, has an approximate size of 1.85 megabytes. This image is shot in 4K. So, one image at about 2 megabytes is significantly smaller than 12 images at approximately 2 megabytes each. Doing it the conventional way, if we were to save each of these layers, they would go into a separate folder, and then we would have to re-import them into the compositing package, as well as using up large amounts of hard drive space, also taking more time to reassemble them in the compositing package. As you notice here, I've saved out these simple JPEGs. We have 12 images These images are 640 by 480, so they are roughly 1/8 of the size of the 4K image, but they still take up 328 kilobytes, which is approximately 1/4 of the size of the EXR. This could become quite cumbersome when you're talking about making a film that has over 200,000 frames. This could add up to several gigabytes. So we want to open our render settings, make sure that we have V-Ray selected, go into the Render Elements tab, and we're going to add some new render elements to our scene. We're going to start with the multi-matte. We select it on the left and press Add. Then we'll notice that there are a few options. We want to change the material IDs to 1, 2, and 3 under the RGB settings. Then we want to select the object in our model and go to the Shape node under Attributes, and V-Ray. We'll find the Object ID. We want to turn that on. And then under the Extra V-Ray Attributes, we have the ability to set the Object ID. Theoretically, you could use multiple layers with hundreds of different matte objects. Here I've only selected 3 just to show how the multi-matte works. If we switch to the multi-matte layer, we see that in fact the 3 different objects we've selected have different mattes. Next, we're going to go over the materials select. There are a few options. We want to go to the hypershade. I have mine pinned to the taskbar, but it can be found under Windows Rendering Editors. We're going to select the V-Ray Car Paint material in our hypershade. Then we want to go back to the render settings and select our material select. Then we want to middle mouse drag our car paint material into the Material tab. If we go back to our rendered image now, and we select the rendered layer, we'll see that every object with the car paint material is now selected. Next, we're going to talk about how to make our ambient occlusion layer. First, we want to find the extra texture node in Layers and press Add. We'll notice that there's a few settings in the attribute editor. Next, we want to go back to our hypershade, and under the V-Ray materials, we'll scroll down until we find V-Ray Dirt. Once again, going back to the render settings, selecting the extra texture, which we have renamed to ambient occlusion, we'll middle mouse drag our texture into the texture file. Then if we go back to the render settings, we can see that under the ambient occlusion layer we have an ambient occlusion dirt map. We're going to add the light select layer. First, we're going to change the name to V-Ray Rectangle Light. You'll notice that it shows up. We need to middle mouse and drag our V-Ray Rectangle Light, and it will put a copy under the node. Then we're going to add a second light select, again changing the name to Sphere Light. Once again, middle mouse dragging our light object into our light select node. Now if we go back to our render view and we look at our different light selects, each light select has its individual layer and can be adjusted individually. We also have a single lighting layer so that we can adjust the overall light of the scene. Now that we have our layers set, we want to make sure to check the EXR multi-layer. Under the image options, we're going to leave everything at the defaults. It's very important to make sure that you know where your project image directory is. Here I have mine set into a subfolder under my pictures. We can set it to any folder we want to. If we do not take note of where the image directory is, and we just try to save it directly from the render view, then we will not get the outcome that we are looking for once we get into Nuke Studio. Here I'm saving the picture directly from the render view as an EXR into my pictures folder. When we open up Nuke Studio and we import our picture, we'll see that on the layer contact sheet, it only has one layer, and we've lost the additional 12 layers by just saving the picture as an ordinary EXR. This is what it should look like with 12 layers. And if we do not do it correctly, then we will only have one layer. So now that we have our picture set, we're going to open Nuke Studio. We're going to start a new project. In this pane, we're going to right-click and import our image file. Under the C drive, Users, Base User, Pictures folder, and if you recall, we had it under a folder called Hair. In the Hair folder, in the temp file, we have our multi-layer EXR image. We open it up in the project manager and drop it down onto our sequence line. Sometimes I have trouble getting it to load, but if you right-click and add new video, then it opens it up. You can just delete your second video after it's been opened. First, you want to right-click on your image, go to Effects, and Create Comp. It will ask you where to save it. I'm saving mine in my My Documents folder. Next, we want to right-click on our VFX, open in the node graph. Seems that I have a previous file saved. Usually there's more nodes when you first open up an image in the node graph. I'm going to delete these elements that I have so we can start fresh. I tried to load it a second time, but it just reverts back to the previously saved file. We'll get into the extra nodes in a later part of this lesson. First thing we want to do is right-click, go to Channel or Merge, and choose the layered contact sheet, not the regular contact sheet. We'll grab the pick whip and connect it to the picture. Next, we want to take our viewer, again taking the pick whip and connecting it to the layer contact sheet. Then we'll be able to see the multiple layers that we have in our EXR file. If your file does not look like this, then you've made a mistake somewhere along the line. We're not going to use this upper section. We're going to concentrate down here in the node graph by separating the different layers of the EXR file. By pressing Control, you can add these dots onto your pick whip lines, making your scene more organized. By clicking on the backdrop file, you can change its size. First, we're going to go by right-clicking to the Channel menu and adding a Shuffle node. It seems that I had the picture selected when I created the Shuffle node, and it's placed itself in between the picture and the layer contact sheet. By disconnecting the pick whips, we can connect the Shuffle node to the EXR picture. Over here in the Properties tab, we're changing the layer to the ambient occlusion layer in the Shuffle node. We're connecting the viewer pick whip to the Shuffle node to see that we do in fact have the ambient occlusion layer separated from the other 12 layers. Next, we're going to add a merge node and attach it to the Shuffle node. Repeating the process again until we have a Shuffle node and a merge node for each of the 12 layers. By pressing Control C, it copies the node you have selected, and by pressing Control V, it pastes it. Now we're going through and assigning one layer to each Shuffle node. Here we have the global illumination. Next, we're going to use the diffuse. I'm still organizing my scene. Now we're going to go to the merge nodes. And under the operation, we want to change each of the merge nodes to plus. We're going to concentrate on the custom UI and the use of the multi-layered EXR, not so much on compositing. Now we're going to add another backdrop node. By double-clicking on it, it will open it up in the Properties menu. First, we're going to change the name from Backdrop to Controller. Next, we want to right-click on the tab and go to Manage User and add a floating point slider. We're going to name it Ambient Occlusion. Now we want to double-click on our merge node to open it up. And we're going to control-click on the pick whip for the ambient occlusion and drop it on the mix slider in the merge node. Now we have a connection made between the ambient occlusion slider we just created and the merge node. We're going to go through this process again for each of the 12 layers that we've created. First, add floating point slider, then typing in the name, global illumination. We're going to add another floating point slider. Notice the minimum and maximums are at 0 and 1. They can be raised higher if need be. Once again, we're going to select our merge node and make the connection by control-clicking on the pick whip and drag-dropping it onto the pick whip of the merge mix node. On the next merge node, we have the materials select. We're going to add a color node to the shuffle node. Under the color, we're going to add a color matrix, placing it in between the shuffle node and the merge node. Once again, right-clicking on our controller, this time we're going to add a divider line to separate our color matrix. Then we're going to add 3 sliders, one for red, green, and blue. And then finish it off with another divider line to separate them. Control-clicking on our pick whip and drag-dropping into the color slots on the color matrix, one for red, blue, and green. Now if you'll notice, we can change the color of the car's paint wherever the car paint material is selected, without adjusting the rest of the colors for the scene. Next we have the reflection layer. Again, adding a custom UI for the layer. Increasing the levels for the RGB values could be helpful, since the color matrix goes up to a scale of 255 in the RGB color space. Here we have the RGB channels set to 1, but they could be increased to 255 for greater variation. Here adding a slider for the shadow layer. We're going to add some more shuffle and merge nodes. You might notice that I only have about 6 up right now. By selecting the backdrop node, we can change its size to fit all of our extra nodes. Here we're adding the light select nodes. I'm rather confused because it only seems to have transferred one of my light select nodes. That's because I forgot to change the names in the shape node in Maya, so they're both named light select. It seems that I've only been able to bring one light select node in. Again, adding custom user interfaces and connecting them to the merge nodes. Now we have the same custom UI that I used on the render forums. But what good is a model if you can't mix it with a live video? So we're going to use a video that I shot of myself riding my bike. It's about 6 seconds long. We're going to start a new project. Middle drag dropping down on to the sequence layer. First we're going to add a create comp node, saving it again in our documents. Once the node is created, we're going to double click on the VFX, which automatically opens the node graph. Here are the extra nodes I was talking about when you first open a new comp. I'm going to insert comp nodes. Then we're going to go to the previous comp that we created just a moment ago. Under the script file, you'll find the autosave and our composition for our CG's Finest Car models. We're going to delete the extra viewer since we won't need it. The first thing we're going to do is to add a merge node into our real live footage. Setting the operation to under, since the live footage will be at the bottom. Next, we can see that somehow our file has been lost. So we're going to go to image read to re-import our EXR multi-layer image. Reinserting it into our chain. Connecting both our layer contact sheet and our shuffle nodes. Next, we want to add an extra merge node to set up the alpha channel. Making sure to keep close watch on the tidiness of our scene. By clicking on the arrow coming off of the left-hand side of the merge node, we have access to the mask node. By plugging it into the RGB alpha, we can now use the RGB alpha to make cutout opacity for our model. We're going to set the operation to over, since it will be on top of our live footage. Finally, selecting the pick whip from the merge node on the live action footage and dropping it onto the last merge node in our layered image chain. Again, using the pick points to keep our scene clean. Since when you have 12 merge layers plus multiple color variation nodes, it tends to get very cluttered. We're checking the version of our live action footage to make sure that it hasn't versioned up while we've been working. Next, we're going to save our comp. In case something goes wrong, we don't have to do it twice. Then we're going to go back to our sequence, select the VFX, and go to Render Comp. This will take a while as it renders the frames in this scene. It's only about 6 seconds long, so it doesn't take very long. Then we check to see that in fact, we do have semi-translucent transparency through our windows. Finally, we're going to go to the export window. There seems to be an extra folder from my last project, so I'm going to delete it. First, we want to select the Nuke folder, and we'll add a new folder. We're going to call the folder render_move, as Move is the proprietary video software that Nuke Studios uses. Unfortunately, it does not have a large variety of video codecs. Next, we want to add a subfolder to the render.move, copy-pasting the title for the subfolder of the DPX. We're going to delete the hash marks, as this will be a single movie and not a series of sequenced images. Next, we're going to select the dot move under the content. And finally, pressing export at the bottom. Seems that we have an error. And if we look down by pressing the eye icon, it says that it failed to render the last frame. By checking under our export again, going to the content of our video codec, we're going to change from an Apple codec to a universal H.264 codec. This time our export goes off without a hitch. Saving our video file in the assigned subfolder, thus giving us the experience that we need to add animated models to live action footage.